from time to time, more gates in heaven open up, and there's a possibility of getting a deeper, closer, more intimate relationship with God. If you don't take advantage of that, you're kind of left behind. You're a relic of a previous generation, and you're missing the boat. I spent a week in Israel speaking almost exclusively to non-religious, or people who call themselves chiloni, non-religious. But they are so religious about not being religious. So it was so beautiful, because what became very, very clear is that the lack of religious feeling, the lack of religious motivation, the absence of religious pressure, which left people thinking that they are secular, is actually the opposite. Without spiritual or religious or mystical ambitions, desires, agenda, if you just leave Jews alone, they will eventually be so Jewish without ulterior motives. And it's happening to the whole world. The beauty of our generation is we have no ulterior motives. There are no rewards, social benefits to being religious. The desire to serve God has become so clear, so pure, so innocent. Like one woman in Israel asked, "Can I be secular and do all the mitzvahs?" Yes, that's perfect. What does it mean to be secular and do all the mitzvahs? What does that mean? I mean, if you do all the mitzvahs, you can still be secular? You can serve God and still be secular? That was her question. The answer is, that's the best way to serve God. Serve God without becoming a tzaddik, without becoming religious, without becoming spiritual, without becoming anything, because you're not there to become, you're there to serve. So what would it be like if a person was doing all the mitzvahs they can do, but still secular? What would that look like? That would look so perfect. It would mean a person is doing mitzvahs without any pressure from family, from community, from synagogue, from schools. That makes you secular. But if you're keeping all the mitzvahs, that makes you godly. Well, isn't that the whole point? Isn't that the whole point of bringing God down to earth? If you bring God down to earth, you do mitzvahs without becoming religious. Because becoming religious means you're getting a little heavenly. Don't get heavenly. Bring God down to earth. To your simple behavior, to your doings, to your serving, and don't become heavenly. Let earth become heaven. But you got to stay part of earth if you're going to do that. So does secular mean grounded? Does secular mean without religious ambitions? Because if that's what it means, it's very good. So here's a thought for the week. A couple of weeks ago, we read about a man named Noach. who built the ark, and his family and the animals were saved from the flood. Now, it's a strange thing that the Torah says quite explicitly what was special about Noach. He was a sincere tzaddik. Now, among the sages, there are two opinions, because the Torah qualifies his being a tzaddik as being a tzaddik in his generation. So what does that mean? One opinion is being a tzaddik in his generation was a great accomplishment because the whole generation was so corrupt and so bad that not one person, not one, was willing to enter the ark believing that God is going to bring a flood. So if you can be a tzaddik in a generation of such bad influence, then you're a special tzaddik. The other opinion is he was a tzaddik in his generation because there was nobody else righteous. But if he lived in the times of Avram, then he would be considered nothing. Nothing. Only in his generation was he considered a tzaddik compared to everybody else. But if he lived in the times of Avram, he would be nothing. That's a very extreme position to take, and very surprising because the Torah makes it very clear that he was a tzaddik. How can any of the sages say he wasn't really, he was just compared to everybody else? But if he was in the times of Avram, he would be considered nothing? That's a stretch. And why would anybody want to do that? The Torah tells you the man's a tzaddik. Why would you want to deny that or take that away from him? It seems a little nasty. I think the meaning of it is this. Noach was a tzaddik without a question because Torah says. And if he lived in the times of Avram, he would be the same tzaddik as he was in his own generation. So what is this other opinion about his being nothing? He wasn't saying Noach would be nothing. He was saying that if Noach, the tzaddik, lived in the times of Avram, being a tzaddik would mean nothing. Not that he wouldn't be a tzaddik. So the debate is not about Noach. Was he a tzaddik? Was he not a tzaddik? You can't have that debate. The Torah says he was a tzaddik. Case closed. The question is, what's so special about being a tzaddik? So here's what it might mean. A tzaddik is someone who does what he's told. You're given a commandment, you keep the commandment, you're a tzaddik. In the times of Noach, there were 7 commandments. He kept all of them. He was a tzaddik. Tzaddik means obedient. That's it. If you follow the rules, you're a tzaddik. If you break the rules, you're not. Quite simple. Now, in the generation of Noach, that was the highest, the most godly a person could possibly be. That's all that was available. God gave commandments, people obeyed. So anyone who obeyed was a tzaddik. But then came the generation of Avram, and something changed. Some gate in heaven opened up, and God became more available than before. When that happens, you got to go with the new availability, or you're considered left behind, you're out of it, and what you did becomes inconsequential. In other words, in the times of Avram, there was a godliness available to human beings greater than simple obedience. So if Noach remained the same tzaddik that he was, and he lived in the times of Avram, then his righteousness would be considered nothing compared to the new availability of godliness that came in the times of Avram. What was it in the times of Avram? What exactly did Avram do? What was he famous for? Everyone was into idol worship, and he ran around telling people that idol worship is wrong, that they should worship God. Did the people in the times of Avram, did they not believe in God? Did Avraham reveal to the people that God is God? Very unlikely. It was too soon after creation for people to not know about God. Avraham actually grieved and sat Shiva for Noach. So Avram knew Noach. Noach probably knew Adam, or at least Adam's son. So you're talking about 3 generations. Adam's son told Noach, Noach told Avram. How can anybody at that time not know that there was a flood and there was Noach and he was saved? And there was no one in the world who didn't know that story. And how was it that Noach built an ark and knew that there was going to be a flood? Because God told him. Everybody knew God, the Creator. It's not possible any other way. Why were they worshiping idols? The early idol worshippers knew that there was God, and they referred to him as the God of gods. Of course, they knew God created the world. They didn't know that if you're going to have a relationship with God, then you can't also serve idols. They didn't see it as a contradiction. They knew there was God, they were in awe of God, but they felt that God was too distant, unavailable for a relationship. So the best you could do is have a relationship with the little gods, the sun, the moon, the earth. So Avraham did not teach belief in God. He taught the belief in one God, monotheism. In other words, Avraham introduced the idea that your relationship with God has to be monogamous, exclusive, only him and no one else. That's a real relationship. How did Avraham come to this conclusion? God didn't tell him. He realized it on his own. Now, that is a giant step beyond God said you better listen. So, if Noach lived in the times of Avram, and he remained the same tzaddik that he was in his own generation, he wouldn't be considered a teacher. He wouldn't be considered a role model. He wouldn't be considered anything at all. Because if you stay with the old way of serving God, when there is a greater opening and a greater service of God, then you're missing the boat. It's irrelevant to ask, well, if Noach lived in the times of Avram, would he have shifted from just obedience to recognizing the monogamy of our relationship with God? Why not? Why doubt that? The statement is, if he did not do that, then his righteousness would be considered nothing compared to the way Avram served God. Well, that explains. If he lived in the generation of Avram, he would be considered nothing. What was so good about the generation of Avram? In the generation of Avram, Avram was the only one. The rest of the world was into idol worship. So why would Noach be considered nothing in the generation? Maybe he would be considered nothing compared to Avram, but not to Avram's generation. So it must mean we're not talking about Noach, about whether he is a tzaddik. And we're not comparing him to Avram. That's not fair, it's not right, it's not necessary. We're talking about a shift in godliness. In the generation of Avram, he was the only one who recognized God and then ran around teaching it to everybody else. So the generation, the people, were not so great. But we're not talking about people. We're talking about the gates of heaven that were opened or not opened. In the generation of Avram, that gate was open. Avram felt it, recognized it, and shared it with the rest of his generation. So again, we're not comparing people to people. What we're doing is we're saying from time to time, more gates in heaven open up, and there's a possibility of getting a deeper, closer, more intimate relationship with God. If you don't take advantage of that, you're kind of left behind. You're a relic of a previous generation, and you're missing the boat. So Noach would be a tzaddik, but being a tzaddik was no longer the way to serve God. Now this leads us to a very powerful, inspiring conclusion. If in fact Noach's righteousness in the times of Avram would be considered nothing, let's further that thought. What if Avram lived in the times of Moshe? I think it's safe to say, if Avram lived in the times of Moshe, he would be considered nothing. He would still be the holy person he is. He would still be the patriarch. He would still be a godly individual. But the way he serves God is no longer impressive. It's no longer the way. There's a new way, another door opened up. God came down to Mount Sinai. If you don't get with that program, you're a relic. So now we can say two things. Noach being a tzaddik in the times of Avram would be considered nothing. Avram being in the times of Moshe, being the patriarch, would be considered nothing. Because Avram was given one commandment, that is circumcision. So imagine he lived in the times of Moshe, and he was very loyal to that one commandment, when now there are 613 commandments. So if Avram was as godly in the times of Moshe as he was in his own times, what would he be considered? Barely anything. One commandment, that is 613. So what happened at Mount Sinai? Another gate of heaven opened. God became more available. God became closer, and we were able to have a more intimate relationship. If you don't get with the times, then all your greatness is considered irrelevant. Now, this continued. So to jump ahead, if Moshe lived in our time, well, let's say if Moshe lived in the generation of the Baal Shem Tov, Moshe's greatness would be irrelevant and considered nothing compared to the godliness that was available in the times of the Baal Shem Tov. Pretty shocking, huh? It really changes everything. We live under the impression that with every passing generation, we get further and further away from God. That's depressing, discouraging. It's not true. That's the good news. It's not true. With every passing generation, we get closer to God in a way that wasn't even possible in past generations. Noach could not possibly experience what Avraham experienced. It simply wasn't available. That gate in heaven was not open. In times of Avram, what people experienced at Mount Sinai simply wasn't available. It's not like Avram didn't try hard enough. Avraham was perfect in serving God the way God wanted to be served at that time. That's perfect, because you can't do any more than what God is asking. So here's, I think, a simple way of saying it. With every passing generation, we become less religious, but we get closer to God. We're never going to be as righteous as Noach. We're never going to be as holy as Avram. We're never going to be as enlightened as Moshe, but we are closer to God. Why? Because more gates opened up. God made himself more available, and now he's more approachable, more reachable than ever before. And here's how it expresses itself. God came down to the top of Mount Sinai. Moshe went up, and there they met. Heaven and earth met. After the event, God rose above the mountain, and Moshe descended off the mountain. The mountain didn't become holy. The communication with God and Moshe finished and was never repeated again. which means heaven and earth touched, but heaven remained heaven and earth remained earth. In fact, the Torah refers to Moshe as the man of God. What does that mean? Was he man or was he God? What does man of God mean? So the sages say there were moments when Moshe was human and there were moments when he was God. For example, when he was at the top of the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, he didn't eat, he didn't drink, he didn't sleep, he didn't need it. He was not human. He was godly. When he came down off the mountain, he went back to eating and drinking. He was human again. So you see that although there was a link connecting heaven and earth, heaven was still heaven, earth was still earth. There was just a link that connected them. And that was the Torah. In the times of the Baal Shem Tov, another gate in heaven opened up, and God made himself available, not at the top of a mountain, without a mountain. God made himself available in our everyday life. And we can now serve God without going to the top of the mountain. So you don't have to go to the mountain, and the mountain doesn't have to come to you. We don't need a mountain anymore. Like the ladder that stands on earth and reaches into heaven, we don't need a ladder. That was necessary in the times of Yaakov. Today, godliness is so available on earth, you don't need to climb a mountain and you don't need to climb a ladder. Where you are, how you are, what you are, do a mitzvah. God is right there. Serve him. So don't become spiritual. Don't become religious. Don't change your personality as if you could. Not necessary. Look around and do the mitzvah that is available at hand. Because God is so close, God is so down to earth, that we don't need to open any more gates in heaven. We just need to take advantage of the gate that is open. And the controversial, shocking thing is, if you remain the same service of God as your pious, holy, awesome grandparents, you're missing the boat completely. Because we have a greater connection, we have a more powerful connection, and the old way of serving God is no longer relevant. It was great at the time. It was perfect for that generation, for our generation. It's nothing. It's nothing. If you enjoyed this conversation or this topic, and you're looking for more information, or you want to hear it again from another angle, there's a way to do that. And that is in this book. It's all there. Order it from Amazon. You can read it, reread it, and share it. These ideas, these messages, this approach to life, this approach to Torah, to meaning, and to morals is vital for the world today. And we need to get this message out to the entire world. It is universal, it's essential, it's indispensable. To support this effort, if you want to be a partner in this crime, check out the link and make a donation. It really helps a lot. And thank you in advance.